Hi there, and welcome to Property Tax Corner. I'm Tammy Murphy, candidate for Montgomery County Auditor, and I'm broker owner of RH2L Real Estate Company. My goal is to help homeowners better understand how property values, assessments, and the property tax system currently works so that you can make better informed decisions. Now today, I want to walk you through an actual property value dispute, an informal review that we had, and I want to explain how that process works. Even though we weren't able to actually record the Zoom meeting with Montgomery County itself, I can show you exactly what was presented, why it matters, and more importantly, what homeowners should know if they are considering challenging their valuation. So the first thing that I want to do is, before we get on the discussion with any of the counties, is that I want to do my homework and I want to see what is involved and what can we do. Now this is the step that I, as a real estate broker, am able to do. Realtors, as usual, will value properties when they're going to list, when they have a buyer to maybe consider that purchase. And so value is something that we take very seriously, and we're very equipped to determine what's a good value, what's the market value, what's a resale value, and all the different types of values that come into play. That being said, as you can see on the screen, I am currently in our MLS system, which is our local Dayton Realtors Association database, that if the property is listed or sold by a realtor, then that information is contained in our MLS, which gives us insight, not what you can find online. Many of you are familiar with third-party sites that try to tell you what your estimate value is on your home, and oftentimes we find that is very off from the real world and certainly from our real estate data. So that being the case, I want to focus in, not telling you or showing you exactly how we get to this number, but certainly showing you the process that is involved. Because one of the things we want to do is gather the data that makes sense for this specific property. And again, there are multiple steps that are involved in determining a property's value. So I just want to give you a clear understanding that this is what we do on the backside, so that when we get in front of the county representative or in front of the client, a buyer or a seller, that we're able to talk legitimately what it took in order to come up with a value estimate on that particular home. So the first thing we're going to do is basically look at what does the MLS show and how do we use that data. So one thing we would do is we would come into the specific community that we're talking about, and sometimes we might need to narrow that down and look for a specific neighborhood. In this case, for today's purpose, I wanted to give an overview of what's going on in Germantown, because that's where we saw that the market had shifted and it didn't really support what the county was saying for this particular homeowner's value. Now, I had already gone through the process of pulling the comp report, which I sent to the homeowner and said, hey, look, this is what I would come up with. Now, the final determination is me coming through the home, seeing if there's any improvements that have been made that weren't captured in this information, or maybe there's some repairs that need to be done, also not captured in this report. And so between a conversation, a first-hand approach, and looking at the property specifically, seeing what's going on with the neighboring properties, all of those are the final determination on what we would say is the true value of that home. Now, the buyer, if it were being sold, is obviously another component that they're going to come in, and what the buyer perceives as the value, what they're willing to pay for it, and then what is the appraised value, which that is another license specific detail process that goes along with someone having a mortgage. They're going to want an appraisal because the bank is going to ask for that third party neutral opinion that is based on facts, so that they can say, yes, the loan to value ratio is there, this is supported, and therefore the loan can go through and the buyer can make the purchase. So I've already rattled off a whole lot, and you're sitting there wondering what the heck. But these are the details that every day I deal with buyers and sellers and with the market in general to say, where are we sitting and what's going on? Because one property may be sitting in a very hot market and another property could be sitting where it's crickets and nothing is happening. And in fact, maybe you're seeing price reductions in that area. Two very different value systems. So when we start talking about mass appraisals and looking at the county overall, that's not going to be a very good determination of value for a specific home. Neither is sometimes looking at a smaller picture like looking at a city, because if you said the city of Dayton, well, there's going to be various components that come into play there, and the city of Dayton is a large area of town, which means that you have micro areas that are now more important and also driving those price points, and that is something that we dive deeper into. So quick overview as a realtor, what we do, me as a broker doing this at the next level is able to represent clients and people, consumers who say, maybe that value doesn't feel right to me and my property taxes are higher than I think they should be. I want a second opinion. I need somebody to speak on my behalf. And yes, you could hire an appraiser, but they're going to charge you for their time, as they should. And yes, you can ask your realtor to give you an idea, but they won't be able to speak on your behalf. It does take the broker level in order to be able to represent the client and talk with the county officials and represent a true broker price opinion. So going through all of this, my comp report here is basically a collection of all the data that's out there known on the property. And so you can see a nice visual picture here of the home. It's a bi-level, and so that means it has some area of the home that is considered in a lower level, not quite a basement but not quite above ground, and then you have your main floor living. That would be your main area. In this case, it's just over 1,400 square feet. So what we would do is say, hey, what's the details? And this page is very important because this tells us when they bought the home in 2022, this is what they paid for it. And it is not active on the market, so it shows as an off-market data, and that was $240,000 that it closed. Now, a quick estimate, this is where you can see the difference in what a mass appraisal automated system works, is that it says, ooh, I see this property value is ranked here with $312,070. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because now you're going to see this adjusted number that is my input, looking at the data, looking at homes and a comparable true apples to apples scenario of recent sales that gives us a different factor. So it really breaks this down to where that value on the home is $175 a square foot, which puts it squarely right in that $256,000 price point range. Now, let me give you an idea, because you're probably wondering, what does that mean? What did the county say it was worth? So the county actually has given this a tentative value, and I'm looking through my papers here, so we're going to pull up the county website here in just a second. But the county is giving them a value of $289,820. So at this point, you see what I, as a realtor, would do. Okay, we may come back to this, but let's bounce over and see what the county auditor site does show, because that's important to also determine in this criteria. So the county auditor site, we want to do a property search, and I have already done this, but I'm going to just go ahead and quickly put that in here so that, one, we can see what's going on and you see firsthand how very easy it is. You put the house number in, you put the street number, and then you click on that owner record file. Now here's where the main screen comes up. That's giving you a brief summary what's going on. So we are not going to pay any attention to the names or the details there, right? I want to get you into this information on the building, because a lot of times this is the first thing that I will see is there something that's incorrect? And if so, does that help the benefit or does it hurt the client? And there we have to make an adjustment, right? So this is showing that it's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and they are showing 1,467 square feet. So that's valid. With that additional square foot living space in that lower level would really give this a total square footage of 2,294. What's important is we're working off of this 1,467 number. And if I just did quick math here, I'm going to switch over to my calculator handy next to my desk. 1,467 times that 175. That puts it squarely at that 256,700 mark. So that is a valid number that is justified in what we are seeing. So now we know if that's the case, then where is the difference and what's the discrepancy? So what we would do is come here and scroll up, and you can see where the tax summary shows any credits, any assessments, and any additional charges that are going against the dollar amount on the property tax itself. You can also see here levy distributions. That's important if you're like, what's going on? Where am I paying it? So that's kind of a different aspect of this, but you can see the greatest number of what you are spending is certainly going to the school systems, but you've got some metro parks in here. You've got the cemetery in here. I know that's one of the things that Germantown and German Township are really specific to. And so these are details that might be of interest to you, not specifically on this valuation, but certainly this is where you would find it. The real thing you want to see, please pay attention to this, is this value history, because this is going to show you every time that there has been a reappraisal, a triennial. Those triennials are coming every 6 years. The reappraisal is every 3 years. So basically they're looking at market data and what's going on every 3 years so that they can adjust your property taxes. That's part of the issue that I have, is that every 3 years there could be 3, 4, 6, even 12 different types of markets contained within that. So what is the time point on when you're doing all of your data dive? And how does that then play into factor on the homeowner? In this case, they've spent the last year doing this reappraisal, and it's going to hit the billing cycle in January. Well, we are already seeing many actually, of our communities are feeling a slowdown and a pushback on market rates. You're going to see that evidence here shortly, but this is why it's important to kind of have the history and the documentation, which I bring to the table. A lot of it is available for you, but by bringing those together, then you make a better case for being able to dispute that property value. So as you can see here, back in 1999, which is the tax year that this gets started, $120,130, and now all of a sudden, we're talking about 27 years later, we're talking about $289,820. Now certainly prices have increased during those 27 years. We understand that that is an equity gain, right? Equity gain for the homeowner if they hold it and they gain it and they maintain the property and they make improvements, then you would understand how that value is going to increase. But my position and the concern is that as a buyer who has to get qualified for that home that includes your property taxes, this number shouldn't change every time you're turning around, whether that's every month or more realistically every 6 months or a year, because you have things that may be coming on, ballot initiatives, levies, any of those things have a potential to affect your property taxes. And what I'm saying is how hard that is for buyers who have a mortgage that are set up to be able to see the fluctuation but not really understand where or what it's going to. So I want to say, let's step it back and let's have the base price of what is the home value that somebody is qualified to purchase, and that property tax baseline is set, meaning it's not going to change. Very similar to those mortgage interest rates. We all struggled when they were variable and you all of a sudden had a spike. Most people were caught off guard, and so they had issues. And so very similar to what we're seeing going on with property taxes is that we're seeing these huge spikes, and suddenly it's affecting our affordability. So if we leave that alone and say, I qualified for the property tax rate at this point when I purchased the home, that is it. It's not going to change. If there is a different factor, if I vote in and a levy passes, I will then pay that externally, separate from changing my mortgage, so that one, I have a better understanding what I am being charged, and two, more importantly, municipalities are held to a higher accountability, because now we know, hey, this tax system on the levy is supposed to go away in 5 years, and that it actually does go away and is no longer a payment that you make. Makes that system a little more true and transparent, and that is important. So coming back to where we see these numbers here is very good information for us. Now, what I do, broker price opinion, when I'm evaluating all of this, this is where I'm diving into the data and saying, what does this actually mean? So part of that report that I provided to the owner was that I wanted to see every time there was a reappraisal of your property, what happened. Now, some of these time frames, as you can see, 2002, 2005, 2008, were starting to be way before this owner owned the property. But this is part of the history, and this is important because I need to paint a full picture of this specific property and what's been going on. Now, not everybody saw their property taxes go down in 2008 to 2012, but this is one that I see as an example. In 2008, they did adjust the price, they being the county, adjusted the property tax basis by just a little over 8%. And then 3 years later, I mean, we're still hot and heavy in the middle of all of the foreclosure crisis, certainly with the negative impact that was going on in our communities with loss of jobs and GM leaving and NCR leaving and just everything that was conspiring against our area. But a slight adjustment here of 1.67% in 2011. Again, just coming out of maybe what that bad cycle was, 2014, kind of that regrowth area we had. They still had a negative impact on their property value, and that was at 10.63%. So very understandable. Those numbers actually, maybe not as much as I would have expected, because we saw a lot of communities lose even greater value than that. But at least I am seeing some numbers that were adjusted lower, and that at least makes me feel a little better about it. But here's where we start to see a big difference. So 2017, there was a little bit of a price uptick, and that was 5.25%. And now 2020, the big year that everything happened, right? We're not even going to talk about COVID, but we understand that it was certainly a factor in what was going on because people were home. And now home became very important. And so the buyers that were looking were buying, and the prices were going up. And so this is one of those ones where we see a large increase. So all of a sudden we had a 37% increase in that value. And this is just prior to this homeowner who bought. I think that's an important distinction, because that means that if I added the 8 plus the 1 plus the 10, I'm actually just a little over 20% that in 2008 to 2014, 20% had been adjusted off of the value of that home. They made it back up, and that value now went to 37%, so now it's back ahead. But that is important because that means that the buyer actually qualified when they did their purchase based off of those higher property taxes. So they didn't have the benefit of when it was the lowest. They are still buying back when it's been neutralized and actually increased, and now they qualified for that home purchase. But here's what's more important, is that that jump in 2020 prior to their purchase remained until 2023 when another reappraisal cycle hit. And now there's an additional 24% increase. So this home, when they first looked at it, typical value 173, they bought it in 2022 at a value of 240,000 because that's what the market was telling them. But property tax value had it sitting at 215,000 with this 2023 reappraisal. So that 24% increase was an adjustment to their property tax, would have changed their mortgage by a significant enough amount, right? Certainly more than cost of living adjustments and probably more than their wages are adjusted at that time. But that's all for a different battle. And here we are now in 2026 when this reappraisal now comes back and there is a 34.5% increase. Now, what's interesting is that we're being told in the news and on all the market medias out there that our area was 19.5% adjusted. They rounded it up, they called it 20%, and a modest increase. So it wasn't the high extreme that we saw in 2020, but it also wasn't 2023 where that was still a higher percentage. But here's what I'm saying is if 2020 was the highest percentage we've seen, right, then 2023 was supposed to be the next. This one is showing that 2026 on this property actually is more than their last reappraisal. So when I factor all of these numbers in, this is a very, very important aspect of this, is that as you can see, I'm giving a summary of what those adjustments are and what are the notable trends. I have to recognize what's going on in the market, but more importantly, here in these 3 assessment cycles, the taxable value went from $126,490 in 2019 to $289,820 in 2026. That's 7 years. And in 7 years, we're talking about a substantial increase of $163,330, and that means it's 129% increase of value. That is more than doubled in just 7 years. Now, I'm a realtor. Many of us would say, well, that's great. That means your values went up. Oh yeah, but the sad part of what we're living with is that it's not just that the property values went up, which should be my equity. It's the property tax burden that I'm now being charged more on a higher number for money I'm not getting the benefit out of unless I sell my home. So this argument is why I go on, we'll call it a rant, or we'll call it a little bit of a verbiage rampage, right? Is because this doesn't make sense. I don't agree with buyers getting qualified and then being pushed out of homes affordability and something that is not in their specific control. So that's one negative. The other negative that we obviously talk about is being taxed on the unrealized gain. That $163,000 increase on the value of my home only benefits me if I actually sell it and make that money. And that's the disparity. So again, all of this information is really what's going into this and why it's important for us to be able to understand what is the process and how does value get determined. And so today, when we were talking and the person who's representing the auditor's office is telling us, well, this is normal and this is how it goes, and I understand, but that's what the market data is telling us. Well, I'm involved with the market data, and this is what my market data is telling me. And so I stood up and said, well, we are getting a totally different value than what you have at coming in right at $290,000. Conservatively, I'm saying we're talking about a value of $256,000, and I have to stand up for the consumer, for the client, because one, they don't know all of this data. They weren't able to pull it together. They could maybe see a few things, but here's what was interesting on the call today is that he says, well, did you go to our auditor website and actually look at what we've done as our neighbor review? And I'm like, well, let's talk about what you're talking about. So we've obviously been to the auditor website. We've seen this information. So with this new reappraisal, I don't know if you've seen this, but they have made a little bit of a splash about we've got new information and a new way to explain and show you what's going on. And that's with this neighborhood view of what's happening. And that's what he referenced in our call today. So the neighborhood view, if you are able to read this, and I apologize that it is definitely small, let's make that a little bigger. During this 2026 property reappraisal, our appraisers reviewed each property individually along with looking at home sales data by neighborhood. Using this dashboard, property owners can see the local sales that are used in these calculations. This information can help property owners understand their new value. Well, that sounds good, but you're talking to a realtor, and I know what the data is saying, and I'm not coming up with what they're saying. So let's go to the next page, and on the next page, it's giving you what they are saying as fair, equitable, and transparent property values. So you get this screen to give you more verbiage that tells you about their process, but it's not really explaining what a homeowner who's disputing what the value is actually means. Let's go further, because now we're actually at that screen that this gentleman we were talking with says, but this shows, and he kept an absolute straight face. And that is what my client said, is like, he must be a poker player, because there's no way he's able to say, boom, his comment, go to the neighborhood view, and you will see what we've determined based on your neighboring homes, that this is your value. The neighboring homes, and here is her value. So her home is actually here, which is marked with this box, and that is sitting with a value of $290,000. You can see over here a quick look. New market value $290,000. Prior in 2025, it was $215,000. That's a substantial jump. That is a bigger jump than what we were saying is our average community value is $199,000. There's $100,000 difference from this particular property to what the auditor's office, is showing on the average community value. And by the way, this difference here from the average community value before to what it is now is only a $30,000 difference. $30,000 difference here and $100,000 difference here. And this difference is, we're already able to say this is outside of the norm. It's clearly not falling into the parameters, and what you're saying specifically you used is making the case for me as a broker to say that's not valid information. That is not legitimate, because I can see here the neighbors are 255, 258, 269, 275,000. Yes, there is one outlier here with 304,000, but just as that one would get thrown out with any appraisal doing their real job, the 204,000 down here would also get thrown out. And you would take those middles and you would say, where is our average? This one is sticking out like a sore thumb, that the value is off. And for that reason, people should dispute their properties. And it may be one little piece of information, but one thing we say, and one thing I know, is that 3 houses on the same street do not necessarily have the same value. That's why you need someone who's experienced and someone who's a professional, someone who understands what's actively going on in the current market. So he made his point. Now it was my turn to make the point for my consumer and say, but let me tell you what's happening right now, because right now we are seeing the market has shifted. So if you started this process last year, because it's going to take a while to do all of the parcels in Montgomery County, what I look at and what an appraiser is going to consider is the last 3, 6 to 12 months, right? And we're going to look at between a quarter mile, half mile, maybe a mile. If it's a specialty property, we might have to go out to 2 miles, but we want to see neighboring areas. We want to know that nucleus that we're comparing apples to apples. So on the screen now, you see that I'm back into my real estate data, and this data is saying, here's all of the activity that's going on in Germantown right now. And right now, we have 13 homes that are listed actively on the market. Greater for you to understand and for me to point out is that there are 5, so over a third of the listings that are currently available are in price reductions. So that means they've seen the market is shifting. They're having to lower the prices in order to get that activity. And now when I look at this data, I'm looking at everything for the last 6 months. This 79 properties that are there, if I click on this box, it's going to do all the work for me in this respect, that it's going to say, okay, we're going to consider all of those properties and we're going to look at the stats for this specific community, because all of this is doing is adding to that arsenal of why we can dispute the property values. So of those active homes, we have a minimum and a maximum sale price that's listed here. And again, that max is going to be thrown out, that lower one's going to be thrown out, and we're going to fall somewhere in the middle with all of those properties. But look here, the average price of those square footages is just under $176,000. Remember, we calculated $175 a square foot. I've got value, I've got data, I've got everything that supports what we're saying as the professional, that this value of this home would not be what the county auditor's mass appraisal system is showing, nor their neighborhood view system that's showing. And by the way, when he mentioned that, well, that neighboring view allows for us to make adjustments for the different types of features, I didn't see anything on this screen that I'm looking at to say what is apples to apples. But in my system, when I'm looking at it, I am going to compare apples to apples with the number of bedrooms and the square footage, and all of that is an important part of that factor. So you can't speak to one if you're really not able to back it up with your systems, where my systems I know are legitimately used, they're standardized across the board, they're validated by appraisers who are involved on behalf of the consumer and with a loan process. And that's the reason why our system definitely has a better understanding and a better process to how you determine value on a specific home. Could I do 500,000 parcels? Well, not in a day, but I'm going to be able to give you a better idea of what's actually happening in more real time because of my experience, because I'm here and I'm not looking at this with an algorithm that says, let's just lump it all together and say this is what we're doing. Or throw it all on a neighborhood and you compare all the houses on the same street. Not the way that an appraisal is done. And I just want to make sure that people understand the process, because that is an important way for you to be able to understand, do you have grounds to dispute it? What else could be a variable that needs to be considered by the county or by the homeowner? Because maybe, you know, they're going to be 2 different opposing opinions. So how do we get it to where this is something I can live with? I think in this case, if the homeowner had received that property tax reappraisal more in the range of that $256,000, $250,000, something like that, that's a normal, I understand, maybe that makes sense, but not to go for $290,000 and you just don't see that the value is there. So all of that being said, I've walked you through quickly, jumping around in a few cases to give you an idea of how the process works. In this case, Montgomery County, because of this reappraisal, because there was a shift with a House bill getting passed and how that was going to affect property taxes, they've given us this informal review window now through the end of August. And in that time, if you file on, which is send an email, call, or request online to do an informal dispute, they're going to set you up with a Zoom link. And to my knowledge, I think that is the only way that they are doing it. They may have a call that you can get in case you're not tech savvy. But I think that they should be doing these in person, because it's a whole lot harder to explain why you're taking a stance if you have to face somebody and actually see them. But that'll be the board of revision process. So as he told her today, told us, I'm going to submit this for my review team, because I do see where your number is a little higher. He being the auditor representative and looking at his screen that he's trying to tell me I needed to consider this neighborhood view, where he is actually having to admit, oh yes, your property may be a little outside of what we saw going on. So we're going to have our review team take a look at this. They'll send you a letter. You'll probably get it sometime right after Labor Day. And from there, if you don't see that you've gotten an adjustment that you think is sufficient, or if you don't like what the report findings show, then you would have to wait till January, and you can file for that board of revision review at that time. And so she's going to get the letter and she'll let me know. We'll readdress and do whatever we have to. But right now, real time, the market has started to shift in some of our communities. So you're going to feel the pain, because you go through this process. They don't give you an answer right away. And therefore, that January bill is going to come, and it's going to be based on these higher numbers. And you're still going to have to make that payment. And if you still proceed and you go through the board of revision, that also isn't going to be a very quick response. Here's what we're doing. It'll be pushed into the middle of the year. And I'm telling you, I know this firsthand from other clients that I have worked with who've gone through this process. You're talking about a year before you actually feel like maybe you've gotten understood, or maybe there's an adjustment that has been made. In the meantime, you suck it up and you have to deal with it. And when I'm talking about a difference of greater than $100 a month, and sometimes I've seen as high as $400 in a month that the property taxes are being adjusted, that's dollar amount charged to the homeowner, more on their mortgage or more on that monthly billing that they're getting paid or that they're having to pay. Or, hey, guess what? I pay my property taxes every 6 months, so that $400 now is $2,400 when that bill comes in. That is a significant impact. And time again, my clients are saying, my wages haven't gone up the amount that these property taxes are going up. My wages don't go up 34%. They don't go up 20%. Or 86%. I had one person who had 86% increase. These are huge, huge numbers, and especially when we know that they're stacking one on the other. So it's not starting from that baseline and then saying, okay, it's a 3% or 20% from this number. It's, oh, so it's raised, and now we're going to go up again. So we just keep adding to the higher value and the higher burden. And that is the problem, my friends. And I just really am trying to educate people to let you know, one, there is a process, and we need to flood the county office with these appeals and disputes, because maybe they would realize what their system is doing is not accurate and it is not correct. And it is not the professional standard of how a normal transaction is done in that value system with a bank, for a mortgage, with a buyer getting qualified. We're just throwing out something after another that doesn't really work. And so with that, I hope that this has helped you. If you are looking at your property tax bill and you're not sure why or what it says, I think that is important for you to be able to say, because again, and I closed with this, with that auditor representative, that, you know, our market is a little bit different because we don't have the property value that when you started this process was making sense. So this was where I would close this, and I would just say, I am looking at a municipality and I'm looking at Germantown, And in Germantown, I want to talk about these prices, and I have this already set for my 3 years. And this tells me here, am I really just on a tangent and trying to make my case to where this value is not there? And here's the point. For the last 3 years, this data shows you, and the market has gone up and down and up and down. And if I counted these data points in the last 3 years, there's well over 12 data points here. And just in 1 year's time, I have 10 data points. And what that means is that we have a changing market every month. Every time we turn around, there could be a slight increase, there could be a big dip, there could be this, and this is just in this year, so we're talking about 6 months' time. 6 months' time in Germantown specifically might have started here at $250,000 as a median sales price of homes, but guess what? It jumped up here in February to $400,000, but then it dropped down here in March to $225,000. Oh, well, here we are in April, $250,000. So we're back at the starting point of the year, right? And now here we are at May. Oh, it's back up to $385,000. But June, down to $274,950. That is an ever-changing market. This is how you could consider this like day trading. It's monthly trading in real estate. And so if your property taxes are always doing this, but it's doing it on a bigger scale of every 3 years, it's tapping that at one data point, and everything else can change. It can change the very next month for that particular homeowner. Let's stop taxing the unrealized gain. Let's give people back their value of their home as equity so that if they choose to sell, they can get that money. But if they don't sell and they live there, they can afford it. And if we have to have property taxes, then let's keep it at a baseline for that purchase price. 35% of what they purchased it for is their tax basis. And now you can have true accountability when a buyer is purchasing the home. They know exactly what their property tax baseline is going to be, and therefore that makes sense, and they either afford it or they don't, and then they can make the right decision for them. Moving forward, there is a better way, and I am sorry that I have gone off on this, but I really thought today was a great opportunity for us to say, how does this actually work and what's involved with this? So I'm not expecting you to do all this data diving in there. I'm happy to help anyone who needs it. And more importantly, I am letting everyone else know this is not just something that an algorithm can figure or fix. This is something that takes real experience and real perspective to understand. And more importantly, we need someone to represent the consumer, the taxpayer, the buyer or the seller in the transaction, because that is what helps them to make the best decisions for them. I thank you so much for your time, and please feel free to check back because I'm sure there's going to be more that we show in our property tax corner, because honestly, I've got a list of people who've said, I need your help. Tell me what I am missing. Why have my property taxes gone up this high? And this could be any number of our 28 communities that are in Montgomery County, because right now, every one of them has a different market. Thank you so much, and I ask for you to let me know if you have any comments, questions, or any ideas in the box below, and I will get back with you. Thank you so much.